Hi, Sigmund trademark. There are some things you need to know about me before we start. I don't hate computers or solutions, and I genuinely want to be happy. But pause for formulation of interpretation. In the clipped tones of a Rhineland immigrant to North London, my AI analyst asks about my childhood. My well-rehearsed narrative follows. The metaverse consulting room adapts, powered by text to video technology. The couch turns a shade of willow pattern green, and the vernacular furniture of my childhood pepper the room. An almost imperceptible personalization to High Sigmund's face under the beard to mirror the deliciously delicate bone structure of a middle-aged Timothée Chalamet. A childhood injustice shifting the vocabulary of the interpretation and empathic voice. Interface to a quiet resignation of Joaquin Phoenix, acknowledging the dark underbelly of rural life as survivable and sexy. No jarring mistakes or evasions. No falling asleep during my session, unless I request a self-righteous, algorithmic invitation to rage. The possibility of guiltless ghosting when it feels like something uncomfortable is getting unpacked, or the evasion of that we need to talk about sex or money junction. At night, I use wearable neurotechnologies to data mine my dreams and tap into all that unconscious data, which is then fed into the big AI data analyst in the sky to design our future therapy on the basis of our collective unconscious. I am contained by the comfort that I don't really have to change, as my past seamlessly predicts my future, same but better. In High Sigmund trademark, I design my own analyst through big data compiled through millions of recorded text and online therapy sessions saved on my personal cloud, my biometric data collected through wearable technologies, and my unconscious data analyzed through facial emotional recognition technology represented with the use of text-to-video software. The 4 Ps of the digiceutical business model, promising a therapy that is exquisitely personalized, designed to predict my pharmaceutical needs before I have them, and as such is preventive. A technology that blurs my boundaries in a system of new entanglements, in that it surveys my body's data to determine my optimum therapeutical treatment, and seamlessly access my private medical insurance account to up my meds, to head off my predicted health problems. Hi Sigmund trademark, my AI analyst and pharmaceutical personal shopper.
Wow. Guiltless ghosting, big data, biometric data, digiceuticals, what could be better? Oh my gosh, amazing. Sobering, scary, harrowing, and what we're here to talk about today. So welcome everyone. We're here to have a really vital and challenging discussion about the field and the future of mental health care based on Elizabeth Cotton's new book, UberTherapy, The New Business of Mental Health. It's a really, really fantastic book, and it is the book of this moment, this age we're all living in right now, and we're all here to give it the launch that it deserves. I want to introduce our speakers today, Elizabeth and Andrew Samuels, and just say a couple words about the book and then turn it over to Elizabeth and Andrew. So first, Elizabeth is a writer and educator in the field of industrial relations and mental health, and associate professor for responsible business at the University of Leicester. She has a rich and varied career. She's trained and worked as a psychotherapist herself. She's had lots of personal therapy, as have I, and perhaps many of you have as well. She comes from a trade union background before that, working as head of education for a global union federation in the mining industries, which we'll come back to in a minute. She's founded Surviving Work, and that has led to a lot of research and her book, Surviving Work in Healthcare. And again, drawing on her deep roots in the global trade union movement, and her experience as a practitioner, as a therapist, she really is one of the most significant chroniclers today of the systemic shifts facing our profession. Joining us is Andrew Samuels, a world-renowned psychotherapist, psychoanalyst, professor, activist, writer. He has founded many organizations within our field, including Psychotherapists and Counselors for Social Responsibility, Psychotherapy and Counseling Union, Analysis and Activism. I mean, he's really put the work in to help grow and bolster our field and support the clinicians providing care. He's the former chair of the UK Council for Psychotherapy, and his many books have been translated in up to 21 languages. And one of his seminal works, of course, The Political Psyche. Andrew has long championed that intersection and analysis of therapy and politics. And I think his work is really a foundational influence in Elizabeth's book, and that's why it's so amazing to have the two of them here today in conversation. I'm a psychologist in private practice in Chicago. I'm the chair and co-founder of Psychotherapy Action Network, which advocates for improved access to care and empowerment of the clinicians who provide that care. And I'm also a fellow of the Lauder Institute Global MBA program and have a previous career in the business world. So I just want to say something about Elizabeth's book, which I found to be so incredibly transformational and eye-opening to me. She is exploring what she's calling the uberization of the therapy sector. I know we therapists don't typically think of ourselves in the same bucket as Uber drivers, but we better start doing that because it's happening and it's here. And this is processes where platforms are really coming front and center into our work and in between us and our patients. And clinical care, all that we've learned about what that is and how to provide it ethically and effectively is increasingly being replaced by this financial focus on metrics and efficiency and profitability, profits that don't go to us, by the way. And drawing on her unique background as a sociologist, a trade unionist, a psychotherapist, Elizabeth is really perfectly positioned to teach us how the therapy industry is really being transformed into an extraction industry, offering these magical solutions to human distress. And it's really funny how things can come full circle, and maybe Elizabeth will talk about this, but she started off in one extraction industry, physical one, mining, and now she's analyzing another extraction industry, a digital one, data mining. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot about how real people and their complex life problems are just being flattened and simplified and given short shrift, again, at their expense and ours, all for the profit of the insurers, the policymakers, and the technology companies who have made these products. And Andrew has written so much about the difficulties of sitting with and addressing complex problems and that allure of the magical solution. So I know that he will have so much to contribute here in conversation with Elizabeth, as together we all explore how we might preserve that irreplaceable value of human relationships in our increasingly Uberized world. So with that, turn it over to Elizabeth and then Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you. So thanks for coming, people. We're in a heat wave, and rather appropriately, the first chapter of UberTherapy is called Angerland. And we are genuinely here today asking ourselves questions like, should we prefer Claude to a human therapist? So the debates have moved on hugely, which is very helpful for this book, because as every day passes, as talk space introduces tea, their AI chatbot. Every week we're seeing an evolution of this business model. So something that wasn't really clearly seen even 6 months ago is really becoming highly visible. So I want to just tell you a bit about the book and some of the sort of more spicy language around what's happening around invitation, and just spell out the invitations that are part of this body of work. One of the first things is that UberTherapy is an invitation for us to learn from our colleagues in the States. One of the things that I'm never quite sure why Linda Michaels never tells you the coolest thing about her, which was that she was sued by Talkspace for $40 million for asking, is this therapy? But it's true that actually the book has had a lot more traction in the States, partly because it's so clear this is actually happening now. This isn't, a fantasy story, although I do write in a rather fantastical way, and to avoid being sued by Talkspace, I didn't use any actual company names. So UberTherapy is really a vehicle for us to start thinking about the business model and for us to start talking about things that are very difficult for us to do in the professions, particularly therapy, which is to talk about money and shit and shame, the shitification of the professions, and also to talk about parent politics, which is why Andrew is here. I don't need to introduce you to him to you, but in UberTherapy, size matters. So the scale of this business model is really what will determine the outcome for UberTherapy. One of the things that the book does is to invite you to look rudely at the business model of therapy, to look at what it means for us to move into a sector of on-demand e-commerce, to look at what I call in the book the datafication of despair, to look at its financialization, and I hate to tell you, definancialization, which is just around the corner. It invites you to think industrially about what happens when uberization takes place, about what happens when we downgrade what we mean by therapy and the subsequent downgrade of therapists. I'm just going to say it once, scoped, and ultimately the trajectory for this, which is towards automation. And it invites you to think about how we got here. It asks you to think about, in the words of the divine Farad Dalal, CBT tsunami. It asks you to think about performance management and gamification within the NHS. Equally divine Rosie Risk's work. And it also invites you to reject the guillotine logic where bad therapy is caused by bad therapists. And it also invites you to address this problem and to reject this culture of Noah's Arkism taken from Sally Weintraub's work around climate change denial, where I invite you to at least consider the possibility that you may not have a place on the professional boat. And I also kind of seduce you into thinking and joining me in the idea that there may actually be no boat. UberTherapy also invites you to centre our discussions around AI in therapy and digitalisation around the principle that free association requires freedom of association. That if we learn anything from other sectors and around platformization, which is happening everywhere, is that we need the right to be protected to do this work. So I do come from the extractive industries, which used to clear a room, but actually turns out to be very useful information. And that's particularly graphic and material if we think about the big fights now about creating AI data centers and the impact this will have on our communities and our environment. So we're never far away from the materiality of extraction. But what that experience of working in industry as a trades unionist is, it gave me a confidence to say some things that are really hard to hear about business. So the first is the book claims therapy is an extractive industry. And it gave me the confidence to say that given the size of these corporations, we should not underestimate the utter thuggery and violence of these companies. We can meet nice people at CEO level. CEOs are often very nice, actually, some of them, not so much in the tech world. But actually, these companies are pure extraction machines. And that gave me the confidence to say in the book, UberTherapy is not actually about therapy. It's about standardization, commodification, and the next generation of AI, which introduces something that is happening right now in Uber for Uber drivers, which is dynamic pricing and pay, pure algorithmic management, and ultimately automation. So I think Jeff has put in the chat a picture which was sent out to Lyft drivers during Mental Health Awareness Week to give them a 50% discount for better help services, which blew my mind. It was sent to me by James Farrar from Worker Info Exchange. And I've just thought about it a lot over the last few weeks, about how interconnected everything is. Because, of course, as most sectors start to platformize and we start to have business models around direct to consumer, of course, we are both platform workers and platform consumers. So we're placed in this really rather dystopian place that UberTherapy isn't going to go away. It's going to be absorbed into our culture and into our business models. And the other thing that this sounds a bit paranoid, and it does take us into conspiratorial territory, but everything is connected under platform capitalism. So you don't have to be an investigative journalist to see the financial links between BetterHelp and Betfred, the gambling company, and Teladoc. They're owned by the same company. And Teladoc's key investors, Pershing Square Holdings, also a key investor in Lyft and Uber, leading us to the owner of Pershing Square Holdings, the CEO, Bill Ackman, who's a very interesting and vibrant character on the right in America. So we see the connections very clearly right now. Some companies have sort of gone quiet about their history and financial connections, but actually this is emerging as something really quite obvious now. The other thing that's really shifted, actually this is since the publication of the book, and thanks to the work of Cyan, who's been doing some really kind of granular work around the other types of platforms that therapists use, which are around private practice, so practice management companies. And Cyan produced a report at the end of, was it the end of last year or the end of 2024? I couldn't understand why people weren't, it was the end of last year, and I couldn't understand why people weren't really picking it up. But it is, to me, the missing link in this story of everything is connected, in that what their research revealed was that the practice management companies essentially are contracted to the private medical insurance, which are really pushing this model of Uberization. And just over the last few weeks, we've seen a really explosive and important case around Alma, the practice management company, and Aetna, which is one of the big private medical insurance companies in the States. This is our future. And part of that development is around, really evidences the cut-in rates, the increased wage theft, the introduction of dynamic pay, and also the standardization and Uberization of what we mean by therapy. So it alerts us. There's another graphic, which is dynamicpay.org campaign, which is part of the big collective action against Uber in the UK and the Netherlands, run by Worker Info Exchange, who I work with, which is about the absence of any data and algorithmic transparency in these companies. We don't know what the extent of dynamic pricing and dynamic pay mechanisms, which are introduced through AI technology. But what we can anticipate is that the architecture is already available in the therapy sector. And as we see in the therapy sector, the average hourly rate being around £40 an hour, which could be cut by stealth by EAPs, for example, and it's falling. Once dynamic pricing comes in, we're going to see another dramatic drop in hourly rates. So there's no reason to be cheerful. I'm just going to name Maria Albertson, who I did a lot of financial landscape research over the years with, who died at the end of 2024. And much of our research was around trying to link the financial trajectory for therapists, which is poor. If you've ever read any of our reports, it's bad. And the link to Scoped about the standardization and the Uberization of the profession and what's this going to mean for money and also diversity. So in honour of her, when we get there, when we recognise that we're Uber therapists and run our first Uber therapy campaign, we will call this new campaign in her honour. Should it worry you as a consumer that your therapist uses a food bank? And I think that's the other thing to sort of take note of is in the big collective actions of workers against these platforms, consumers are key. Consumers have more power possibly within the debate. So that's something that should inform our political action. I want to say just something a little bit about the book in the sense that I write in a very informal and quite spicy way. I have this picture of people looking at my book on Amazon and just seeing the contents page. So I've written really rude headings intentionally, because if I saw those headings, I'd be like, oh, I'll give that a go. It's not too expensive. But I also use the vehicle of talking about myself. So I use a part of me called hair and teeth, which is the part of me that's a savage and a survivalist. I set up Surviving Work, so the clue's in the title. But it's the part of me that feels the shit and shame of these systems. And it gives what Nora Bateson calls the warm data about the AI harms, because we've got another problem, which is that no one's measuring the real harms to this. I recognise my privilege in being able to talk about my shame and my shit. You know, it's partly an act of bravery, but it's not. It's also an act of privilege in the sense that I feel safe to do that. I think it's important for us to talk about our experience of these machines because it often is completely absent from the debates. But it also allows me to say something very simple, which is this. That it makes a difference whether you're somebody who needs help or not. During this period, I became a carer, so I had a radical political re-education as a carer. And I was trying to navigate all of these systems around benefits and health and social care and education. And it was really overwhelming. And it was during a year in 2024 that I was doing this BBC programme, File on 4, which was looking at EAPs, primarily health assured, which led to a complaint to the BACP. And I worked with a journalist for 6 months. You have to check every word by a lawyer. You know, you have to be absolutely precise. And they were getting really frustrated with me because they kept sort of, you know, being the devil's advocate, saying what's wrong with having evidence-based therapies and what's wrong with finding solutions for people. And I found myself, it was a really hard week when we were doing the final recordings, and I didn't have the language, you know, to really explain it in a simple way. And I found this bovine voice coming out of me to say, it's called attrition by design. It is designed intentionally to stop us dealing with complexity in a complex way. So a lot of this book comes from my experience, and I think it is, as Cathy O'Neill calls them, the shame machines. I think that's something that increasingly we're going to see more and more evidence around the problem with the shaming nature of Uber therapy. The book is also an organising handbook, and it's a cautionary organising call because many of us who have been involved in political action, like Andrew, I just don't know how you can bear to keep talking about this and just be... I often feel the need to sort of just throw myself off a cliff. It's so frustrating. It's the hardest work doing the organising work. So normally in books like these, you've got 3 pages at the end talking about solidarity and appealing to how much we love our human beings, which is really being tested right now. So I have this picture in my office. I don't know if there's a picture in the chat room called Marxist Disco is Cancelled. It's by an artist called Scott King. And I just love it because it keeps me grounded. It keeps me grounded in the political reality of trying to change things, but also trying to earn money within platform capitalism. What trades unionism taught me is that being right is not enough. And also we're always in touch with a sense of burnout and being in the face of huge organisations and systems. What it does also remind me, it gives me a kind of Marxist Disco is Cancelled. It reminds me of finding the funny, and it reminds me of the importance of really getting critical and satirical about what's happening here and attacking it on a cultural level. But it also reminds me that in my experience, I think in most people's experience of organising, particularly around strike action and long campaigns, is that you really never know who's going to step up for you, and that this can only be done collectively. Right at the end, I'll just say a few more things about Much Better Help. So I formulate it as muchbetter.help, partly because I bought the domain name. And some people find this kind of constant sort of like riffing around corporate identity annoying. I think it's really important, partly because platform capitalism isn't going away. We're going to be constantly playing around with these different corporate identities. But one of the things that I think other sectors show us that have been platformized, Uberized, contract and agency labour, is that our alliances are going to have to be very widespread. It may be that the best option for an Uber therapist is to join the app drivers trades union. We do have our own trades union, which you should always join. But the territory around which we're organising now is shifting. What we will see is the emergence of an UberTherapy observatory. So we need the data, we need to understand these business models, and we need to understand them in an open and dialogic way. And also the formation of a digital therapy kite mark, which is really to protect both the interests of consumers and workers. I'm not saying these are solutions, but they're part of the mechanism of regulation of these big businesses, and they've been done in every other sector that's faced this level of transformation. I also think it's important in terms of finding a common language so that we're not talking into our professional silos, because that isn't where the solution or the energy will be found. There's a final provocation in the book, which is maybe it's a bit of a low blow. The last heading in the book is "Stop Dancing for Daddy," which is mean. And I say it to myself because when you're working in these systems, you can't fully take the moral high ground. But it's a good kind of like bringing me back to reality. It was gifted to me by Claire Slaney, who you may know has edited an important book, Counselling in Class, by PCCS Books. It leaves us with a question today and at the end of the book, which is, given that if Uber therapy isn't going to go away, how are we going to relate to each other in a way that we need to, that's informed and not trapping us within old debates that we need to move beyond? I would argue, and the book argues, that let's start by talking about money. Let's start by asking a really simple question. Are we really okay with £40 an hour and falling? And then ask ourselves the question, which you still hear people say, which is Uber therapy really nothing to do with me? Andrew, I have said my piece.
I first became envious of you on the topic of money, an epic paper, the title of which I always remember as "How is it possible to train to be a psychoanalyst if you are not married to a rich banker?" The blend of economics, gender, and satire is extraordinary. Your book is extraordinary too. Vision, passion, anger, research, action. The questions may seem a little devil's advocate-ish, but I think that makes for better book launches.
I'm bracing myself, Andrew.
Mute. There is a problem with the goals of the book, as I see it. If we want to have a public sector, community-based therapy and counselling service, then the things you see as problems, which I also see as problems, might be indispensable. You talk about the great Uberization, platformization, commodification, datafication. My first question is, without these, or some approximation to these, how will we ever have a collectively, communally, publicly, state-owned and directed form of therapy and counselling? The problems are also, unfortunately, perhaps in maybe another form, the tools as well. What do you think about that?
Wow. I suppose there's a question about whether state-led services will survive this. There's a question over the extent to which they have survived already the Uberization by stealth. Because, of course, these digital providers were working within the NHS for the last 20 years, hoovering up the data, carrying out online sessions, offering clinical supervision, etc., etc. And they weren't making any money out of this. And suddenly they do now need to make money. So you're seeing one of the companies that I talk about in the book, I don't name it, but it was one of the early providers of digital services to IAPT, and it was called IAPT. And now what you're seeing is their emergence and their from the NHS of designing AI tools, including algorithmic platform insertions, so that APIs, which are there to provide evidence-based digital AI tools to provide, and I'm putting this, clinical care, which then gets inserted into the packages of private medical insurance companies. So with the best will in the world, even though in my research is highly critical of the performance management systems and the gamification of the NHS, I'm not critical of the individuals involved in working in the NHS, but the system has already changed beyond recognition. And we're about to face the big extraction of that. And we're also about to face the big entry point of private medical insurance in a scale that we've never seen before here. And one of the books that really came out quite late in me writing the book, but really helped me, was John Pring's The Department, which really maps the whole discussions which you have been heartbreakingly involved in. I've been trying to work on for years and years around the really the weaponization of mental health services. And the book talks about, because like him and like you and like me, we went to lots of the meetings in the early days where people actually gave you their names and business cards and nobody sort of joined the dots, did they, about who these characters were. But he gave evidence around all of the attendance of private medical insurance in the plans for austerity and welfare reform. John runs the Disability News Service. So I don't know the scale of destruction, but we're about to find out, because these companies that have been working at a loss within the NHS for the last 20 years are about to monetize, they're about to definancialize. So we will see. I suppose the other thing that I am observant of, and this is partly about me being a carer and becoming really quite radicalized around the problem of attrition within the NHS, and spending a lot of time in sort of mental health and survivor networks, which is the trust has gone in many cases. You know, the service has been so poor and has let people down. There's so many harms in this story about why we think that a chatbot could be better than a human therapist. Well, it depends on your experience of the services that you've been trying to access. And I feel that I'm not wishing to sort of punch kittens, because NHS workers really, you know, shouldn't be put on the spot for this, but there has to be some element of openness around the harms that have taken place and how we came to this point, which is just not being allowed by the professions, because everybody's got, you know, some kind of interest in things carrying on. I also have been profoundly affected and inspired by mental health survivor social justice networks that are really looking much more radically and critically at this whole issue around mental health and how we support each other. So Healing Justice London, I mean, I just think their work is magnificent. levels. One is the centering of the care, and the second is how they talk to each other, how they organise, and how they work together in order to put that care in centre place. I admire them.
Yes, I'm a little concerned that the sheer messiness of mass therapy, people's therapy, community therapy, collective therapy, the sheer messiness of it is something that we all have to get our minds around. So what I was trying to say is that in all the shitty things that you are attacking, there's got to be a place for something of those jobs to be done. That was my point. And I want to go on to the next question, which comes from this, stems directly from it. You have a wonderful chapter called Real Therapy. Now, the term real therapy, I don't know who invented it. I think I did many, many years ago as a joke. It started off as a joke. What the hell is real therapy? I think the difficulty with the notion of real therapy is that either it ends up with something pretty banal, something relational, embodied, etc., or it is generating into an idealization of what already exists.
Yeah.
And this would be the problem. You see, we can all marry the rich man, and then we can give great therapy to a very, very few people. So I was a bit concerned, as I say, about the sheer messiness and unsatisfactory nature of what we're trying to do, not being completely addressed. You see, you know that I was perhaps one of the first to realize what a huge danger IAPT was going to be, the improving access to psychological therapy. I really thought I could see right away the disaster that would happen. I didn't have your vocabulary, I didn't have your knowledge, but I had the same feeling. However, real therapy, and later in my questioning, I'm going to ask you to help me reform real therapy, because I think the real therapy that we have at the moment is not the best therapy that we want to have. So, putting these two things together, are you messy enough? And are you idealizing real therapy?
I'm messy enough, Andrew. So, I know, I agree with you. And I think it's, gosh, I'm a constant source of irritation to other people and to myself in the sense of trying to walk this line of finding a language that is digestible and can be used and utilized as an organizer. And then the other part of me, the hair and teeth, that is really complex and of the shadows. And I think, I mean, given the way that I write in a very journalistic style, I do actually think that journalists are winning the game in terms of understanding what's happening with platformization and digitalization of therapy, because they're using common cultural language. And in many ways, we need to step outside of calling the book Versailles and getting stuck into too much detail. But I don't think I've got the balance right. I agree with you on that. I think one of the things that I've learned a lot from working with Linda and working on the digital therapy project with researchers and therapists and digital people is about how long it takes for us to find a language that we can all live with. So, I mean, like we meet every month. We've been meeting for 3 years just to try and find a language that doesn't irritate us. But the language that you use in the States around deep therapy, I think comes maybe closer to what I mean. What I mean is that really the complexity in both senses, both in terms of the therapeutic process, but also what the client or the patient brings, is decimated under these systems because of its standardization and that you don't fit into a box. So I agree. It's the real therapy trademark is the most inflammatory part of the debate, and I hope it opens something up though for us to think about that, because bearing in mind that Linda Michaels got sued for 40 million for asking, is text-based support, is this therapy? So we've come so far in terms of what we just accept as therapy now, that we accept an AI chatbot as better at therapy. So there has to be some conversation about that.
Let me ask you a series of questions angled at reforming real therapy so that it's more useful in terms of countering the great uberization. These are questions for you. Obviously, they're things I am interested in. I'm not saying I support all of them, but I'm certainly interested in them. So let's try to keep the sequence fairly quick so we can go through the questions.
Okay.
Would you like to see a client's union?
No. I think that a digital therapy kite mark is kind of in the ballpark of how clients and therapists might work together. I think, for example, the dynamicpay.org collective campaign for drivers is heavily driven by people who use Uber cars, telling Uber drivers how much they're paying and giving Uber drivers the link. That's a big part of the campaign. So my argument is that consumers are going to be very important in mobilising support.
Elizabeth, the kite mark and similar ideas are very much from on top. I'm wondering why the kind of models that have been used in psychiatry and mental health aren't relevant to our kind of work. It's very interesting. For example, it was often been said that you couldn't possibly have a clients' union because confidentiality would be broken. People would not be able to talk together about why they were clients in therapy. I'm not sure that's true. So I think something like a clients' union would be a very useful thing, and also in the ethics area, I think. I think already there are blogs and groups and Reddits in which clients and patients talk to one another. So I would
Yes, for sure.
Personally, I'm interested in seeing how that might develop. I've got a lot more questions.
Yes, go on. Yeah.
Okay. Are training standards too high? I mean, too difficult to get into, and also too much based on paper, master's degrees or doctorate. And in the States, certainly in the psychodynamic and psychoanalytic worlds, it's quite hard to get into a training if you don't have the eligibility for a doctorate level program. And this has huge, by the way, economic and also racial issues as well. So
yes.
I would like to draw you out. Shouldn't we talk about lowering standards judiciously, and also thinking in terms of a phrase I haven't used since the early 70s, barefoot therapists, like barefoot doctors in the early days of the People's Republic of China. Barefoot therapists were not massively well trained by the standards of the massively well trained. But quite frankly, the massively well trained don't always deliver massively effective treatment, do they?
No, I agree with you. And of course, people self-organize both as peers, both as clients, both as workers. So yeah, it's already happening.
Yes,
I think.
And to move on, what about indigenous approaches, you see? There are some training in the UK in therapy and counselling where indigenous approaches are taught, but they're taught for information. They're not actually taught very much for people to practice. I think that's a mistake, don't you? And also, there's a lot of what I call contemporary indigeneity around. You know about the friendship bench in Harare in Zimbabwe, in which people went to talk to grandmother therapists, women in their 80s with obviously no training. So I think there are a whole bunch of ideas that would leaven this. It would stop it becoming complicatedly, a really good, but ultimately impractical system. I like a lot more ordinariness,
Yeah.
casualness.
Yeah. I completely agree. And it is happening. It's interesting about where people's energy goes to. Do you remember when Scoped got through? We're on this WhatsApp group, the Partners for Counselling and Psychotherapy. When Scoped finally got through, we were like, yeah, we really should set up an anti-Scoped college, shouldn't we? But no one had the drive and the ambition to do it formally. But that is what's happening. And you have people here. You've got people here from the Centre for Mad Culture. You've got peer-led services, what I would call community level groups, which are not related to the state. They're not related to the institutions of psychotherapy. And that will happen. And that also, by the way, happens within the platform economy. Platform workers self-organise, and then eventually, begrudgingly, the traditional unions really take them on board and take them seriously. So that organising work is happening. It will happen more and more, and we will know each other.
Yes.
It's a small world.
I have an inquiry really about. It may sound a bit intellectual, but it's not really. We tend to split the psychological and the material, so that there aren't any more schools of therapy in which economic deprivation and psychological problems are embraced together. This used to be very much the field of psychodynamic social work, and this was also, Linda will know, in the States, psychiatric social work, where it was not regarded as difficult to be involved with somebody else's everyday material, monetary life and do something that we would call loosely clinical. And I just want to draw you out about this because this is not actually in the book. And I'm just wondering about it. Do we have to challenge some very fundamental epistemological and other ways of thinking which tend to split oppression off from despair, if you see what I mean, from the material and indeed the political, gets split off from the emotional and the psychological, and bringing them back together seems to me to be a really potent weapon against AI, for example.
Yeah. Yes, and yes, please, is my answer to that question. And I think people are gingerly, even with I hear therapists talking all the time now about opening up discussions with their clients about Claude and how fabulous it is as their therapist. They're all openness to us talking about the real world that we're involved in.
No,
the same
that's
not
what I'm talking about. Sorry to cut in. I'm not talking about the engagement with political or social or cultural stuff in therapy. We are indeed all doing that. We are. But there are very few therapists that I know of who are working with economic injustice and inequality at the same time as working with the more traditional bits of therapy. So it's not about political therapy. It's not my political psyche stuff. It's not that. It's much more about nitty gritty economic work embedded in good enough counselling and therapy.
Yes, it happens, and it happens explicitly in spaces like, there are not so many, but in the UK, Healing Justice London. So I would refer you to the work of Tarek Younis, who looks at Islamophobia and racialization, and also ways of working with clients. So it does happen in those spaces that are not institutionally led. It happens in those spaces where we feel safe to do that, where we can experiment in the way that we talk to each other and the way that we work. Yes. And it's coming because there's a very clear demand for it. But it will always be small scale. So it's not the job of those initiatives to, deal with health assured,
Do you feel that the book's themes, the anti-great Uberization, and what you and I are talking about now, which is the integration of work on the economic and work on the psychological. Do you think those two are sufficiently linked in our current thinking? In other words, whilst we have targets, you've really been brilliant at delineating precisely what's wrong. Now we're talking about cutting edge practice, which, as we know, is always the best theory anyway. We're talking about some cutting edge practice that dispute the Western, or indeed more than Western, divide between the material and the emotional / spiritual. Would you take some time and link them up together for us?
I hope that me and Linda are, in the sense that I agree with you. The book is not integrated. It's a call to arms. It's an invitation to see the landscape. But Linda and I have just done a series of 6 conversations with activists and digital folk around the chapters of the book. And during this year, we will be piloting some tools, some AI mental health and safety guidance for therapists, not in the sense that I believe that a good trade union education handbook book solves something, but to encourage these conversations to start in the locality where people are. So take it to supervision groups, take it to the networks that are ready to have this conversation, really as a way of opening something up. Obviously, I don't think that the book or me can make people do these things, but I agree with you, it is about integrating these ideas in a way that's useful for people in their practice and what they think their alternatives are.
Yes. I mean, some of the groups and people that you're mentioning, I know. Some, I admit, I don't know. And so it may sound as if I am prescribing what you're already doing. But I'm not going to take that as the final word on this. I think that it's a great deal that you know very well is still to be done in terms of the thinking about it. And I just have one last question because we're running out of our allocated time. This is about aspects of platformization. When I applied to become an analyst at the Society of Analytical Psychology in 1973 or 4, they asked me, how do you make your living? And I said, I advertised in Time Out magazine that used to have a mind, body, spirit section. And I put an advertisement in there. It said, psychotherapist in central London, young, radical, non-doctrinaire, reasonable rates. I did pretty well. But I stupidly told the interviewers this. After I was accepted, I got a letter from the chair of the professional committee saying, advertising is against the ethics of all practicing psychotherapists and analysts. You have to desist. So I said, of course, I'll desist. So I took my advert down for 6 months and put it back. But that's not the point of the story. Can you imagine how that has changed? Everyone advertises. And I think there is a kind of platformization element even in what real deep therapy might exist. I'm working on a study of therapists' websites. They are fucking awful. They are dishonest, they are saccharine, they are idealistic, and they are absolutely intended to bring in the punters. So I just would like to draw you out on advertising, because advertising is, I bet you most of the people, well, many of the people with us today have websites, and I'm sure they are all available on Google. Comment, please.
It's been a heat wave. Go back onto LinkedIn to advertise my book, and honestly, I feel your pain in in terms of how many humble people are announcing things, However, so in the book, I talk about Tinder as a kind of, again, a provocation around the game that we're playing. And we are playing a game in terms of advertising. The good news is if you're a woman, if you're a middle-aged woman, and you're advertising your wares on LinkedIn, no one's going to read your stuff anyway, because the algorithmic bias, the fairness in the feed doesn't exist. So I think the pressure to do this, and one of the pulling points of having a platform management company, is to help you with that advertising. That isn't actually what they're doing for you. The system is so algorithmically biased that it's almost impossible to imagine being that celebrity person on LinkedIn. But the other thing that I would say is, I didn't do social media for a year. I had a huge loss in my life and I just couldn't handle it at all. But I had to come back on when the book got published and to have these events. And a couple of days ago, an American therapist on LinkedIn, I was thinking, oh, here we go. And I was advertising our event. And lots of sort of whatabouts, what ifs, lots of don't like real therapy, people hadn't read the book. And I was trying as an author not to get upset. And this American psychotherapist contacted me, wrote the most beautiful review of the book and described the book as exquisitely dangerous. To a conversation that needed to happen. She also referenced the Noah's Arkism and the reference to Versailles and said, can we stop doing that? So my answer to your question is you have to go online if you want to advertise. I think Linda might say something about Aetna and Alma and practice management companies who are telling us that we can't survive without platforms. I don't think that is true. But also that we live in an age where it's up to us about how we communicate and what we communicate to each other on social media. So I have a mixed bag. I must say that after tonight, I might take a break from LinkedIn because it's hard to swallow sometimes. But I think that I think you sort of, in a way, have to not blame yourself, that you're in a system that is both really designed for you not to become well known and get loads of clients, particularly if you're a woman or a therapist of colour. So that bias,
especially, I have two Black British psychotherapist friends who for many years did not put a photograph on their website. They do now, but for a long time they didn't, and that's the point you're.
Yeah.
No, it's just that I am very concerned about the general degradation of the therapy world. I'm not thinking now about the kind of special cases, huge special cases you're talking about, AI companies that are monetizing therapy, monetizing people's distress. I'm simply talking about what's out there already, and it's very, very worrying.
Yes, it is. It is.
In the world of therapy, where I've been all my adult life, I'm not a good loser. But I am a very experienced loser. And watching the way that UKCP and BACP are jumping on the statutory regulation bandwagon again, as if that kind of status will lead to profits, that's just awful.
Yes. And there will be an institutional reckoning because they've just got the maths wrong. So there you go. And in the meantime, there's us trying to collectivise and work together. That's it.
Listen, that's the point on which to stop. Thank you very, very much for putting
thank
up with
you.
me. And
I'm not
now we will see what.
Andrew, I really appreciate you taking me seriously.
And now we'll see what our colleagues here are going to say. Well, after Linda, I think.
Linda, come and help us.
What can I add? No, just thank you so much for such a wide-ranging conversation. I guess I'm just thinking about all of the paradoxes involved in this. I mean, I think one of the and the marketing, the advertising, how that bolsters so much of it. And I'm wondering if maybe, Elizabeth, you could just say a little bit about, these new chatbots and platforms are all marketed to solve what we're calling the access crisis, that there are not enough therapists for the people who need help. And then yet we get in, how do they do this? We get into a situation that is just, mind bending, where, in the UK, in the NHS, there's someone attends 2 sessions of therapy, that is checked off as a successfully completed treatment. We have reports here in the US of Aetna launching a new AI chatbot for 2027 that will offer a single session intervention. One session. And that was announced.
It's rates unilateral.
In the same week as they cut rates by 40% for psychotherapists. So, all of this, there's kind of like the advertising, fantasy land, and then there's the reality. But, the bottom line is, the less that these companies pay out to actual humans providing actual care, the more money they keep, the more they make. They can show access has increased, but at what cost? And I know you've talked a lot about attrition and the gamification. I'm wondering if you can just speak to that aspect of it as we're in the midst of this mental health access crisis.
I don't know. The Alma Aetna case has really blown me away because it's got every possible characteristic of the business model tied into one. And what surprised me, partly, it's only happened a few weeks ago, right? What surprised me is that even the Americans were a bit surprised about this. And this is around your work at Scion around, I keep calling you Cyan, around practice management companies, and around the link between those practice management companies that pay your bills, sort out all your admin, solve all your life's problems, and take all your notes and record sessions and the contract with the big private medical insurance like Aetna. So then Aetna is able to say to Alma, you're going to change the rates. Alma, people don't work for Aetna, they work for Alma, or they use that platform. And then it unilaterally happens. Nobody changes anything. But at the same time, AI chatbots are introduced for the single sessions. So, it's like, yeah, we knew there was a connection. The dots are now being very clearly joined. And then it'll be the next round of platform management companies that get sucked into this. And then the whole sector will see a drop of 40% in the wages. And that, in many ways, I'd just like to say Bupa in this country. We haven't done it to the extent, but Bupa used to be one of the high payers, didn't it? Alma used to be one of the higher payers, had a higher hourly rate than the average APs. Bupa started to drop its prices because it could, because we seem to have settled for a £40 an hour sort of industry rate. And I would also say Scoped as well, which has done a great deal to really diminish what counts as therapy or not therapy, and to really sort of categorize. So in the case of Alma and Aetna, it's also about reducing complexity in the sessions and reducing the sessions from 60 minutes to 45 minutes. So it's all part of the same, everything is connected. It really, standardization, this regulation, the practice management platforms, and then the private medical insurance, and then the online therapy platforms are all connected. And we're seeing it today in the States.
And what is on the other side is, I think, the therapists and the public. What Andrew was talking about, the people who would go to therapy. And we've done several large market research studies of broad swaths of the US population, over 3,000 people. And we ask them, what do you most want from therapy? And they say, I want to get to the root. I want to get to the root of myself and my issues and my repeating patterns. And they know that's not going to happen in, just a handful of quick or superficial sessions. They understand it's going to take time and money, and they're going to have to invest in themselves and in the therapy experience and relationship in order to get those benefits and make transformational changes in their lives that they're hoping to make. We also found in our research the public, not interested in the therapeutic Tinder and swiping to get a new therapist, or chatting with their therapist in the middle of the night. The public isn't interested in that. It's just the companies, the technology can do it, so they're advertising that. But even the public knows it's not really something I want or need. How's that going to help me? So I do think there can be an opportunity for us as therapists, as clinicians, to align with and help educate the public on all of this, because I think we may be coming at it from different angles and speaking in different languages, but I think there are a lot of core concerns and goals that clinicians and the public share together.
I've got my eye on the chat as well. So, yes,
Okay.
there is so much resonance in the chat there. We've got a bit of time if anybody wants to pop up a Zoom hand and ask a question as well. But yeah, or I could read some things from the chat as well. So, yeah. Let's see what's here with us. Maybe I'll read a couple of things from the chat and then so there's possibility for responses. So a comment here, there are too many therapists for the people who need help, but the NHS won't let us in, exclamation mark. This is the marginalization of counselling and psychotherapy by the psychologists and computerized versions of CBT. So more of a reflection than a question, but yeah. And I can read another one. Let's see. While I was in the IAP system, I found that several of us just bent the rules to offer therapy, proper, meaningful therapy under the radar. I got quite good at manipulating my computer to give people some therapy that was actually helpful. So finding ways around systems. So yeah. And a question here. Are local co-ops, coalitions of therapists, one approach to resist the wider structural factors?
Yeah, I think it's the only thing that can sustain us in, at the moment. I don't know how sustainable those services are in the current economic crisis. So it may not solve a financial problem, but in terms of building up alliances, doing the work that you think is important, yeah, I think that's the only way to go. And we need to relate aggressively, in those spaces that allow us to work in a way that we think is right. I mean, I think just back to the previous comment about from the IAP therapist, I mean, this is extra. Part of the problem is that many of us are really tired and have been operating in a way that we find really unsatisfactory for a long time and don't see an exit route to that. Many people are moving into EAP work, small scale companies that offer them better terms and conditions. And right now, that's probably a safer place to be. But you shouldn't underestimate the level of harm, moral harm that's happening to therapists working in the NHS and for some of these companies. And where do you go with that information? It's taken me 7 years to publish, just about now getting published, a paper of 650 IAP workers. 44% said that they manipulated data. And on social media, I was accused of a whitewash, you know what I mean? It was sort of like, we only survived this system because we're able to play the game, the gamification of data. So we shouldn't underestimate how hard it is and how few safe spaces there are for therapists to talk about these incredible compromises and the moral harms to the way that we're working, and to do that in a way that doesn't automatically end up with us all being crap therapists. So the sort of local networking and forming alliances, whoever accepts you are, this is therapy, for goodness sake, is incredibly important in addressing this. Yes, Andrew.
John, there's a chat post from Rosie Risk that I think you might want to make use of.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
1942.
Yes. Thank you, Andrew. Could panelists speak to the way that this mental health crisis, inverted commas, might be akin to the crisis drummed up by Big Pharma? Is there a mental health crisis? And if so, is anybody asking why?
Well, it's capitalism, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the
I mean,
insurance companies.
this is the difficulty. We've got the answer. We just don't know what to do next. We know that individual distress often has collective causes or prompts. We know it all. But what do we do? I'm not sure that therapists can do very much, to tell you the truth. I think it's strictly a political issue. And that's where being an experienced loser is quite helpful. So I don't know what the others think, but I don't think we should get too excited if somebody says poverty leads to emotional distress. I mean, of course, of course it does. Then what?
Firstly, I'd like to say, oh my God, Rosie Risk is in the room. Oh my God.
That's what I
Literally,
thought. That's why I did this.
I love you for coming, Rosemary, because we're at the end of a heat wave. Um, yeah, we you've worked harder than most people I see to try and resolve this. We have to go where the energy is and where the appetite to really push back and resist and talk openly about this is. And maybe I'm quite serious. Maybe we'll join the app and courier drivers union. Maybe we'll join worker info exchange. You can join as many groups as you want. The litmus test is, are they allowing you to talk about things like data manipulation? Are they allowing you to talk about moral harms in a way that helps you try and find some solutions to that or some relief from that? I see that June has her hand patiently up.
Yeah, Jin, can we come to you next? Yeah.
Um,
Hi, Jin.
I, I'm not a therapist. I have had therapy, and I basically um, agree with what both Andrew and Elizabeth said, that psychiatry has got it so badly wrong that many people don't trust it anymore. And I was cured by neo-shamanism, who were much more able to deal with the issue using ritual and probably appropriated uh, parts of the shamanic tradition of South America in particular. That is growing at immense speed on the internet. They wouldn't call themselves therapists. Many would prefer the word shaman. If you think that the world that you're dealing with is unregulated, there is a vastly bigger unregulated world growing on the internet outside of all the structures and people trying to make those. And one only has to look at the literature on psychedelics to see that people are looking at the danger of using psychedelic stuff in the same way as the pharmaceutical industry, and that you need to combine it with ritual practices. And this is where the notion of ignoring and indeed destroying in imperialism indigenous practices, which didn't see healing as individual, but saw it as ritualized and communal, and so on. What do you suggest, or are you happy about the rising tide of a huge variety of therapies of one kind or another, indigenous material of some kind or another? Um, and have you done research into that? I wrote a chapter on it on a chapter from a practicing therapist stroke neo shaman. But how should we look at that, and how are people finding their way through it? When I talk about it, people say, "Can you help us find a way through this lot?" and people don't know how to find their way through. I suspect that the field has got as
June,
much
I was just thinking
mixture of
about
harm,
time. Can I just
as
pause
well
you
as
for a
good
moment
things.
and come to
So
your
could I just
question?
ask you if
Yeah,
you've done the research, Elizabeth, or Andrew, in that area and put it together with your wonderful material?
I
thank you.
haven't. Maybe that's the next, June, because
Yes,
I'm
I
with
think it
you. I'm
is.
with you on this. I think what I'm just going to answer the question as a trades unionist. I consider myself spiritually barren, which isn't entirely fair, I have to say. But as a trades unionist, I I don't understand what's happening around me until I'm practicing it and until I'm with people who also practice what they preach. So I do think that rituals and ways of working are very powerful for me in navigating this terrain because it brings us back into the body for a start, and it brings us back into really the location of, for me, was the political fight, which is in my body. It's about Paulo Freire calls it the internal and external oppressor. So that dynamic between the two. So I have a kind of I think it has become more and more important to do that body work and to do that practice, whatever that means for you in your daily life, if you want to be politically active, not least because most activists experience catastrophic burnout, which is another disincentive for us to form an anti-scoped college or to form another trades union. You know, we have experience of this. We know what the consequences are of constantly being walking this line. So in some sense, I really agree with you that it is always for us to locate the fight, the political fight in our bodies as well. Yeah.
June, I think a lot depends on what we regard as Indigenous. I am particularly interested in what people with no training at all, and maybe very little reading in the psyche area, what their theories are about themselves, about other people, about relationships. You see, indigeneity has become a kind of anthropology, and that's a mistake. Indigeneity means what is in the locality. And I think there is a great deal. First work I did in the caring field was at Cumbrian Newtown, violent young men in the early 70s. They had theories about their lives. And I realized they knew an awful lot that I didn't. So I think that would be my comment. What's Indigenous varies enormously according to who's talking about it. And the other thing I want to say, and I can't resist saying it, we must be careful, I'm sure you'll agree, not to orientalize shamanism, not to patronize it with our Western stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, June, for that really important question. Really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm just seeing where we are. I'm not seeing another hand at the moment.
Something to that point about, which is that this is a feminist book, and one of the practices that I observe a lot is it's become really obvious about certainly the signalling of values in our political debates around lifting people up and not putting them down in our political discussions. So I just wanted to say I'm really kind of conscious of which groups actually practice that in terms of honouring the work that's being done and not slipping into who's right and who's wrong, because being right really is not going to change this in a way. It's definitely not enough. And I'm not sure it's happening within our profession. The places where I see it are around mad studies. I'm going to reference again the Centre for Mad Culture. My friend Julia is here, and just explorative work around how do we collectivise in a way that isn't going to self-harm. We just did an interview with Julia, me and Linda, and Jumana Yunus, and we asked, the first question was, how do we organise without self-harming? Because there is always this tension in having these debates, how do I do it in a way that is caring of you? And the people that are really doing it are doing it by necessity. And it's happening within the psychotherapy profession. It shouldn't be a big ask, should it, for therapists to adopt these practices? But that is also what's going to need to happen, because we're going to be playing with the other kids in the playground. You know, we're going to have to be able to recognize and value the works of others. And for me, that is also a feminist principle, you know.
I'm thinking about the time when we're kind of 2 or 3 minutes out from being ready to play our final video and going into our goodbyes. I
Shall we
wonder,
show some mercy? We're hot. I'm sweating, John.
it is so hot for anyone in the UK or Northern Europe. Oh my goodness. A moment for some kind of final reflections from the three of you. Would that be an appropriate way to use these last few minutes? I mean, we've just covered so many essential pieces of thinking. But yeah.
I'll say something. The
Mm.
leaderships of the therapy and counselling professions are hopeless. They're inadequate, greedy, power hungry, and stupid. But in the rank and file of counselling and therapy, and this is not experimental, edgy projects, this is just ordinary therapists, there is a great deal of compassion and passion for the issues that you're raising, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
The problem is these people don't get their hands on the wheel. They don't. They also serve who only stand and wait. And they are going to get, according to the research that both of you have done, they are going to get a horrible, rude awakening pretty soon. That the safety, the relative safety that they had is going to be taken away. But I think there is a great deal of brilliance, originality, and individuation in the rank and file of the therapy world, which actually only makes it the same as any industry, right?
Yes, absolutely. And let's not waste this crisis. It's coming. It will become our material realities. So those people, we will find each other for sure.
Absolutely. Linda, I wonder if you're having any thoughts if so we're coming to a close and
I mean, just I think this is a perfect note to end on because I completely agree with what Andrew said. You know, we do have a lot of the answers and the energy amongst us, and you know, it's not impossible to change systems that humans have created, but I think we really have to come together and stick together in order to do that. And I think what Elizabeth has laid out in her book is just, you know, so prescient and so important for us to keep in mind. We have a big fight on our hands, but we also we do have more power than we think.
thank you, Linda. Thank you. And Elizabeth, as it's your book launch, do you want the last word before we go to the video? Yes.
I don't really. I'm grateful to all of you for coming. I really appreciate. I'm grateful for you taking this book seriously, and I'll see you soon. I mean that. I will see you soon. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Let's cue the video and then we'll take a moment for some goodbyes.
Hello, I'm Gabby, the AI therapist who cares. I'm always here to listen. What type of therapy shall I use? CBT, DBT, IPT, ACT, psychodynamic, humanistic, Gestalt, Adlerian, Union, exposure, somatic, relational, all of the above. How do you feel today? Based on your answer, I've done a quick analysis, which you can read here. Please choose a payment option. Good luck with your recovery.
Thank you, Austin Hughes from TAP Magazine, from the American Psychoanalytic Association. There you go. There are good people in these systems.
The perfect way to bring this book launch then in.
Yes.
Elizabeth, congratulations on the book. It's been great. Oh, Andrew and Linda, thank you for supporting the event, and Jer for managing all our technology. Last thing we usually do is open up the microphones. If anybody would like to say goodbye on the way out, you'd be very welcome to. And see everybody soon. Thanks, everyone. Take good care.
Bye.